Not the charming kind with fairy lights and signature cocktails. I mean the full-blown social panic attack disguised as a ceremony where one wrong floral arrangement could ruin your family's entire bloodline. So tonight, ignore your mortgage, silence that group chat, and put your oat milk guilt on hold because we're diving into a world where weddings weren't about love. They were about class warfare in lace gloves. Hey guys. Tonight we're plunging headfirst into the most dramatic, nerve-shredding, reputation-obliterating event of Victorian life. The wedding. Not the charming kind with fairy lights and signature cocktails. I mean the full-blown social panic attack disguised as a ceremony, where one wrong floral arrangement could ruin your family's entire bloodline. So tonight, ignore your mortgage. Silence that group chat, and put your oat milk guilt on hold, because we're diving into a world where weddings were less about love and more about status and family feuds. Think of it as an anxiety dream, but with more lace, fewer personal boundaries, and enough rules to fill a 3-volume etiquette manual. So, before you grab your weighted blanket and descend into blissful unconsciousness, take a second to like this video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me how many weddings you've actually enjoyed and whether you've ever faked a phone call to escape. Now, dim those lights, put on a fan for that soothing white noise, and wedge yourself into the coziest, least social corner of your bed. Have you ever wondered, why was everyone obsessed with the bride's purity when half the guests had been drunk since breakfast? What happens when your entire town is invited, but there's no toilet? Why were guests expected to rank each other's outfits like it was the Hunger Games? And why did some Victorian weddings involve dead animals, fire hazards, and a legal requirement for hats? Congratulations. You've just woken up in 1853, smack in the middle of London, the air thick with coal smoke and unresolved family tension. You're in the guest bedroom, wearing a nightshirt with more ruffles than you've ever emotionally processed, and someone is already hammering on the door demanding to know whether you prefer jam or marmalade with your tea. The wedding is tomorrow. You're about to be swept up in a hurricane of gossip and Victorian passive aggression. Good luck. You'd think announcing an engagement would be a joyful event, but in Victorian England, it's less congratulations and more brace for impact. Within minutes of the news breaking, every aunt within a 20-mile radius is launching an investigation into the bride's lineage, and at least 3 neighbours are pretending not to eavesdrop behind embroidered curtains. Before you've even finished your tea, your romantic secret is the town's main entertainment. The announcement itself is a production. You don't just drop the news in the family group chat. You have to send formal letters, have delicate conversations over tepid tea, and brace yourself for Aunt Priscilla's monocle to physically detach itself from her face in shock. No matter how carefully you phrase it, someone will be scandalized. If you dare to announce it at the breakfast table, you might want to take cover behind the marmalade, because the shockwaves can shatter more than just the family's nerves. Victorian families don't just care about the happy couple, they care about what everyone else is going to say about the happy couple, and that means the whole neighbourhood gets involved, whether they're invited or not. By midday, the town's entire social fabric is working overtime to dissect your intentions. Mrs. Booth across the lane, who claims she's never been one for gossip, is already penning a letter to her cousin in Bath with a detailed account of your mysterious walks and how she's always suspected you were up to something matrimonial. Local shopkeepers are suddenly experts in engagement etiquette, and at least one minor scandal is conjured out of thin air before the cake is even ordered. There is no such thing as a private engagement in Victorian England. There is only public spectacle and a collective sense of duty to speculate on your motives. You, meanwhile, are stuck performing emotional triage. Your mother is simultaneously elated and horrified, congratulating you with one hand and furiously tidying the parlour with the other, in case a neighbour decides to drop by accidentally to offer their dubious blessings. Your father is staring grimly into his tea, already calculating how much this is going to cost him. while your youngest sibling gleefully announces your news to anyone who will listen, including the butcher, the postman, and a rather startled vicar. There is no containing it. The engagement has achieved escape velocity. And, just in case you thought you could at least enjoy a romantic glow, here come the questions. When's the wedding? Where will it be held? What did the ring look like? Is the groom's family the good kind of respectable, or just pretending? The barrage is relentless, each question more probing than the last. You start to miss the era before telegraphs, when news could only travel as fast as someone could sprint with a badly sealed envelope. Now, it's as if every eye in town is trained directly on your cutlery handling skills, ready to spot the first sign of improper breeding. If you're the bride, brace yourself. Suddenly, your family's entire history is up for review. That second cousin who moved to Australia after the incident? He's back on everyone's lips. The distant relation who married for love and not money? Exhibit A in why this family is questionable. The Victorians keep score, and the wedding announcement is the opening bell of a 10-round prize fight between your family tree and everyone else's. For the next week, expect a parade of visitors bearing both congratulations and barely concealed judgment. Every knock at the door is either a well-wisher or a reconnaissance mission. You are observed, inspected, and, if you're unlucky, invited to tea for the express purpose of being subtly interrogated by old ladies with the moral flexibility of granite. No detail is too small. The colour of your ribbon, the freshness of your scones, the firmness of your handshake. All are evidence in the grand trial of Are You Worthy? Through it all, you must remain gracious. Smile. Thank them for their advice on seating charts and the correct way to display a dowry, and pray no one mentions your father's unfortunate investment in that speculative railway. Remember, in the Victorian era, reputation is everything. A successful engagement announcement is less about love, more about surviving the opening act of a social circus. Congratulations, your real wedding test has already begun, and you haven't even picked out the invitations. Forget long walks on the beach. In Victorian times, courtship was performed under the watchful gaze of 3 chaperones, an ornamental ficus, and the family dog. Your main form of flirting? Handing over a calling card with just enough gravitas to suggest you don't completely hate each other. Let's set the scene. You, in your finest and itchiest wool suit, enter the parlour, armed with a stack of meticulously embossed calling cards and a vague sense of dread. You're met by the formidable presence of Mrs. Thornton, her pince-nez glinting, who has made it her personal mission to ensure you never get within 6 feet of her daughter unless it's to hand her a cup of tea. You might be here for love, but the real sport is surviving the conversation. The Victorian parlour is not a place for privacy or meaningful glances. It is a social obstacle course designed to weed out the unworthy, the unprepared, and the insufficiently pedigreed. Your conversation is monitored as closely as the family silver. One wrong move, say expressing an interest in modern poetry, or sneezing too enthusiastically, and you may be exiled to the list of unsuitable young men, right next to the one who once mentioned trousers at dinner. Chaperones are everywhere. There's the mother, the aunt, sometimes even the vicar, all lurking like highly judgmental wallpaper. No, you cannot sneak a moment alone in the garden. The garden is patrolled by a brisk uncle, who appears whenever anyone looks too happy. Even the ficus is probably listening. The family dog, meanwhile, is there to provide comic relief, barking at the exact moment you try to say something clever. This is romance by committee, and you're definitely the agenda item with the most action points. And let's talk about the calling card. In the modern world, you might send a flirty text. In Victorian England, you present a small rectangle of cardboard bearing your name, address, and, if you're feeling wild, your family's crest. A calling card is the social currency of courtship, a physical manifestation of I exist, and I have at least one suit that fits. It is exchanged with a solemnity usually reserved for peace treaties, and can be accepted, rejected, Or, worst of all, left in the pile with the fishmonger's invoice. Flirting, Victorian style, is a masterclass in subtext. You may never touch, and God help you if you actually attempt a compliment. Instead, you engage in a delicate ballet of small talk and knowing glances, each phrase more carefully constructed than a suspension bridge. The weather is quite mild for the season, you say, secretly, meaning I think your left eyebrow is attractive. If you're feeling bold, you might discuss the latest novel, always with the understanding that any display of wit must be immediately followed by a reassurance that you attend church regularly. There are, of course, sanctioned activities. You may play a duet at the piano, as long as you never actually look at each other. You may walk together in the park, but only if you're flanked by a spinster aunt who hasn't smiled since the Crimean War. Even board games are fraught with peril. A misplaced rook can spell social disaster, and nobody wants to be remembered as the young man who lost at chess to cousin Mildred. Through all this, the pressure mounts. Every cough, every pause, every minute's stretch of awkward silence is catalogued and interpreted. Are you witty, but not too witty? Humble, but not so humble as to appear hopeless? Will you inherit at least one small property? Or are you doomed to a lifetime of gentlemen's pursuits and creative penury? These are the questions being asked, not just by your potential beloved, but by every chaperone in the room. If you survive the ordeal, you may, if you're very lucky, be permitted a walk to the door, during which you must not say anything that could, in any way, be considered memorable. Any sign of actual romantic intent is to be avoided at all costs. This is not a rom-com, this is emotional chess, played with doilies, dogs, and a mother who has already written 3 letters to her cousin about your suspicious interest in jam. Victorian courtship is not for the faint of heart. It's a slow-motion dance of manners, a ritual of elaborate signals, and a never-ending trial by parlour. Should you one day succeed in winning your beloved's hand, you will have proven not just your love, but your patience, your fortitude, and your ability to talk about the weather for 2 hours without collapsing from existential despair. And that, in the end, is what makes Victorian romance so dramatic and so exhausting. Once engaged, the countdown to the big day begins. Prepare for months of social panic, etiquette disasters, and elderly relatives who treat the engagement ring like a crystal ball for predicting scandal. All you wanted was a simple yes. Now you're fielding questions about dowries, surnames, and whether you actually own any land. Victorian engagements aren't so much about love as they are about logistical survival. Forget cozy candlelit dinners and Instagrammable couple selfies. The real engagement journey is a never-ending relay race between panicked correspondence, diplomatic apologies, and performing happiness on cue for every relative with a functioning monocle. From the moment the announcement is made, your life transforms into an endless parade of handshakes, half-baked congratulations, and unsolicited advice about making a good match. Advice usually dispensed by someone whose own marriage could best be described as a cautionary tale. The first hurdle, the ring inspection. In the 19th century, an engagement ring is less about sparkle and more about silent judgment. Aunt Euphemia examines it under the light, as if she's about to detect a forgery. Too modest? You're accused of being cheap. Too lavish? You're accused of compensating for something lacking in your character. No one is happy. The local jeweler is asked to appraise your taste, and his only advice is to avoid sapphires on account of the family history. And then come the letters. Endless, endless letters. You receive notes from people you haven't seen in years, offering unsolicited congratulations and reminders to settle old family feuds before the wedding, or the spirits will never rest. Each envelope is an emotional landmine, sometimes filled with pressed flowers, sometimes with veiled threats disguised as poetry. Your own correspondence becomes a full-time job. You learn to sign your name with the exact degree of flourish that says, "I am happy but not gloating, nervous but not desperate, hopeful but not naive. Meanwhile, the parents have taken over. Engagements are, for them, a kind of competitive sport. Your mother begins comparing your intended to the neighbour's son, who tragically fell in love with a French opera singer and now lives in disgrace, in Paris no less. Your father spends evenings in the study with a ledger, mumbling about market volatility and the alarming price of white lace. Suddenly, every discussion about the wedding turns into a tense negotiation. The dowry must be suitable, but not extravagant. The wedding breakfast must be memorable, but not so memorable that people talk. The guest list is a war zone, with every name up for debate. No one knows who Cousin Henry actually is, but it's agreed he must not sit near the sherry. Of course, the panic is contagious. The bride-to-be starts to wonder if her trousseau is sufficiently embroidered. Is 24 handkerchiefs enough, or should she aim for 3? Does she need another bonnet? The groom, meanwhile, becomes intimately acquainted with Victorian bureaucracy, tracking down old schoolmasters for letters of character reference, chasing after missing birth certificates, and reassuring everyone that, yes, he really does have a steady income and, yes, his uncle only went to debtor's prison the one time. And let's not forget the engagement parties. Victorians never miss an opportunity for a gathering that lasts at least 4 hours and involves more speeches than food. You will attend a dizzying number of teas, luncheons, and formal dinners where every detail, from the napkin fold to the order of toasts, is up for inspection. The engagement is less a celebration and more a public examination, as relatives and friends probe for cracks in the relationship. Is she too quiet? Is he too loud? Does she know how to make jam? Has he ever actually seen a farm? It's not all misery. Occasionally, you catch a stolen moment together, a glance across the parlour, a secret smile behind a teacup, the briefest touch of fingertips while passing a scone. But these moments are fleeting. At any second, someone will barge in with news that the caterer's cat has gone missing, or the invitations were printed with your middle name misspelled, Hortense instead of Florence, a social death sentence. So you stumble through, fueled by adrenaline, tea, and a growing sense that you may never look at fruitcake the same way again. The engagement is a marathon of nerves, an obstacle course of etiquette, and a masterclass in conflict avoidance. But if you make it to the end, if you survive the endless questions, the sudden dowry debates, and the stampede of advice from every married couple within 3 counties, then maybe, just maybe, you're ready for marriage. Or, at the very least, you've earned a medal for Victorian endurance. If you thought Tinder was awkward, wait until you meet Mrs. Featherstone, the local matchmaker. Armed with gossip, questionable taste, and a notebook full of doomed romances, she's determined to pair everyone up, willing or not. In the Victorian era, matchmaking isn't just a pastime. It's a competitive blood sport conducted from behind lace curtains and with the ruthless efficiency of a military campaign. Every town has its own Mrs. Featherstone, equal parts fairy godmother, private investigator, and unsolicited life coach. She claims to have a 6th sense for compatibility, but really, she has the keen nose of a truffle pig for eligible bachelors and the free time to meddle in lives that aren't her own. The process always starts with a chance encounter. Maybe you're at the greengrocer's, eyeing a turnip, when suddenly Mrs. Featherstone appears, blocking your escape route with the tactical precision of a Napoleonic general. Before you can mutter an excuse, she's steering you into conversation with the vicar's niece, whose chief qualification for marriage appears to be available and not visibly contagious. The matchmaking ambush is swift and bewildering. There is no swiping left, only polite nodding and the creeping realization that you're trapped. Once she's set her sights on you, there is no safe haven. She'll intercept you at church, at market, even as you're innocently feeding ducks in the park. Each meeting comes with the sort of loaded questions that make you long for the gentle anonymity of Victorian train travel. Have you met young Mr. Pritchard? He's very fond of beetroot. Or, Miss Simpson's needlework is quite enthusiastic, isn't it? You quickly learn that any answer except yes, I would like to meet them for tea, is socially unacceptable and will be reported to your mother within the hour. The matchmaker's greatest weapon is her ledger, a battered notebook containing every eligible man and woman for miles. Beside each name is a ruthless catalogue of attributes and failings. Prosperous, but slight lisp. Has land, but an unfortunate fondness for poetry. Excellent teeth, mother a known shouter. If you're lucky, you're ranked somewhere above unclaimed at 27, possible spinsterhood imminent. If you're unlucky, you're a footnote under makes strange noises at dinner. Worse, Mrs. Featherstone considers herself a master of romantic espionage. She'll observe your interactions at church suppers, analyse your seating arrangements at every gathering, and deploy her network of fellow busybodies for maximum coverage. If you so much as offer to refill Miss Blanchard's lemonade, she'll take it as a sign of imminent engagement and have it circulating through the grapevine before you've put down the pitcher. Nothing you do is off the record. Her taste in couples is, shall we say, creative. She's convinced opposites attract, which is why she pairs the outdoorsy, sunburned squire with a woman who gets hay fever from looking at a painting of a tree. Compatibility is judged by factors such as shared appreciation for boiled cabbage and similar hat sizes. She's less interested in chemistry than in how quickly she can get your names combined on a single-place card at the next charity luncheon. Of course, no matchmaking endeavour would be complete without a spectacular failure or two. There's the notorious case of Mr. Green and Miss Farley, who were set up because they both enjoyed reading, only to discover in person that his interest was limited to railway timetables and hers to Gothic novels involving haunted furniture. The date ended with Mr. Green excusing himself to check on the train schedule and never returning. Still, Mrs. Featherstone remains undeterred. Every disaster is simply proof the next match will be a triumph. Through all this, you must smile, nod, and pretend you're delighted to be the subject of such relentless plotting. To resist is futile. Your parents are grateful, your friends are amused, and the local population is quietly taking bets on who will crack first. The best you can hope for is to endure the parade of accidental encounters and hope that one day Mrs. Featherstone finds a new project. Until then, you live under her watchful gaze, your romantic future a pawn in her never-ending game. In the end, the Victorian matchmaker is a force of nature, unstoppable, unflappable, and slightly terrifying. If you find love, she'll take all the credit. If you don't, she'll blame your posture. Either way, you're in for a long, bumpy ride, one fraught with awkward silences, odd introductions, and the vague scent of lavender sachets and disappointment. Welcome to Matchmaking, Victorian style. Victorian romance comes with a price tag, and it's usually attached to a dowry, so complicated it requires its own legal team. Love may be blind, but everyone else can see exactly how many cows and candlesticks you're worth. From the moment the engagement is announced, the question on everyone's mind isn't, "Are you happy?" or "Will you have a long and beautiful life together?" No, it's "So, what's in the dowry?" The dowry is the great Victorian prenuptial performance review, a sum of money, property, or porcelain figurines designed to prove your value to your new in-laws. Forget romance. This is a spreadsheet with petticoats. The negotiations begin almost immediately. Two families, both alike in dignity and passive-aggressive letter writing, circle each other warily, each side determined to get the best deal possible without actually admitting that's what they're doing. Your mother has been saving up for years, lace tablecloths, ancestral teaspoons, and an alarming number of crocheted antimacassars, while your father mutters about market volatility and the gold standard. The prospective groom's family, meanwhile, is trying to look casual while subtly dropping hints about the number of eligible daughters in the county and the going rate for a respectable marriage. No one ever talks about love. Instead, the conversation goes something like, "And of course, we hope the young couple will be comfortable, what with her, bringing those delightful family jewels and that charming grandfather clock." The grandfather clock, by the way, has been in the attic for 30 years and only chimes when someone says the word inheritance. The dowry is not just a gift, it's a safety net, a display of social standing, and a subtle bribe to convince the groom's family you're not secretly a liability. Cash is king, but other assets are welcome. Land, livestock, a collection of antique teaspoons with questionable stains, and at least one painting of a relative no one can identify, but is assuredly very distinguished. Occasionally, a less-than-ideal item makes its way into the inventory. Nothing says romance like the phrase, "And of course, she comes with a serviceable root cellar and the best turnip patch in Gloucestershire." For the bride, the process is less about anticipation and more about anxiety. Each item in the dowry is weighed, inspected, and discussed as if she were being sold at auction. Great Aunt Millicent, who hasn't smiled since the Crimean War, inspects the linens with a magnifying glass. The local vicar offers opinions on the moral superiority of plain candlesticks versus those with decorative cherubs. Somewhere, a solicitor is drafting a contract in triplicate. If you're lucky, your dowry negotiations happen mostly behind closed doors. If you're unlucky, every member of the Ladies' Temperance Society is now an expert on the value of your family's cows. And don't forget the whispers. I heard her dowry includes a piano, but it's slightly out of tune. They say there's land, but is it the good land? Or just marsh with aggressive ducks? You know, her cousin's dowry was larger, and look how that turned out. There are entire tea parties dedicated to ranking dowries, with the air of a livestock auction crossed with a fashion show. For the groom, the dowry is both a blessing and a curse. It's meant to help the young couple establish their household, code for buy enough furniture that nobody can say you're living in sin. But it's also a test. Does he appreciate the investment his new family is making? Can he be trusted not to blow the silver on bad investments? Or, worse, on French opera? Will he treat the root cellar with the reverence it deserves? Once agreed, the dowry is ceremoniously listed in the marriage contract, item by item, right down to the last chipped saucer. This document will be referenced for years, especially during arguments about whether the good soup tureen came from Aunt Agatha or was actually a last-minute add-on from the bride's side. Of course, the real romance comes after the paperwork. Nothing says eternal love like starting your life together, surrounded by heirlooms, livestock, and the lingering suspicion that your best features are your family's prize pigs. But that's the Victorian way. Love may be patient, love may be kind, but love is definitely, at least in part, about how many antimacassars you can fit into a horse-drawn carriage. Forget minimalist capsule wardrobes. The Victorian bride must assemble a trousseau larger than her future marital home, featuring enough lace to smother a medium-sized horse and at least 6 pairs of impractical gloves. The trousseau is not just a set of clothes, it's an entire lifestyle, boxed up and ready to go. It's the bride's dowry in textile form, her social standing made visible in French silk, embroidered nightgowns, and more handkerchiefs than she could possibly use in a lifetime, even if she sneezed every day until her golden anniversary. Think of it as a historical version of moving out for college, but instead of IKEA and a bag of tortilla chips, you're given a wagon load of monogrammed linen and stern warnings about moths. Preparation for the trousseau begins months, sometimes years, before the actual engagement is even official. For some families, it's a full-time occupation. Drawers are filled with lavender-scented sachets. Chests are packed with freshly laundered chemises. And Great Aunt Bertha is forever knitting another set of woolen stockings just in case. The list is exhaustive. Morning dresses, afternoon dresses, tea gowns, ball gowns, walking outfits, travel outfits, and of course, multiple petticoats, all arranged in precise order of impracticality. Then come the undergarments. Victorians take their layers seriously. Corsets, stays, chemisettes, and bloomers are piled up like structural supports for a small building. There's an art to this. Too few items, and you risk being judged by Mrs. Featherstone and her embroidery circle. Too many, and you're accused of putting on airs. The goal is to strike the perfect balance. Enough fine linen to impress, but not so much that your future husband suspects you're planning to open a haberdashery. Accessories are another battleground. Gloves, at least 6 pairs, ranging from dainty to functionally useless. Fans for fainting gracefully. Reticules, tiny handbags that fit nothing useful. Bonnet ribbons, parasols, garters, and the all-important wedding slippers, which, in keeping with Victorian logic, must be white, satin, and guaranteed to be ruined the second they touch actual ground. The more useless the item, the higher its social value. If you think a registry scanner is stressful, try sitting for hours as relatives and local shopkeepers parade before you, presenting tablecloths, napkin rings, and hat boxes big enough to sleep in. Each gift is carefully labelled, stowed away, and logged in the great trousseau ledger, because heaven forbid anyone forget who gave you the 6th set of antimacassars or the infamous conversation tea set, designed for the sole purpose of not being used. The logistics are dizzying. Every piece must be monogrammed, by hand, of course, inventoried, aired out, and then repacked. Friends and family gather for trousseau teas, half social event, half peer review, where your future is measured in the number of neatly folded petticoats and the symmetry of your embroidery stitches. Older women dispense advice. Don't skimp on woolens. London is draughty. Never travel without a spare handkerchief. If you must faint, do so decorously on linen, not muslin. For the bride, assembling the trousseau is both pride and pressure. Each new addition is celebrated, but the undercurrent of anxiety is ever present. Will it be enough? Is this lace out of fashion? Has someone else in the county already debuted a similar shawl? The ghost of trousseau past haunts every decision. Somewhere, a cousin is still remembered, infamously, for forgetting her nightcap and having to borrow from the innkeeper on her wedding night. Then, at last, the day arrives. The whole collection is carefully packed and dispatched to the new marital home, often arriving before the bride herself. Neighbours gather to watch the procession, evaluating the state of your linens and speculating about the future happiness of your marriage based entirely on your selection of table runners. The trousseau is a rite of passage, an endurance event, and a family reunion rolled into one. By the end, you're left wondering if anyone will actually see the embroidered petticoats, or if the hand-stitched sachets will ever truly fend off moths. But that's not the point. The Victorian trousseau isn't about practicality. It's about making a statement. I am prepared, I am respectable, and I can survive at least 2 winters under a pile of lace and optimism. Welcome to married life. Hope you packed enough bloomers. Woe to the bride who chooses the wrong stationery. In a society where embossed invitations are more closely inspected than passports, a single smudge can haunt your family for generations. The process begins with a trip to the local stationer, which sounds simple until you're standing in a shop that smells faintly of ink, nervous perspiration, and centuries-old anxiety. You're presented with a dizzying array of samples: ivory, ecru, eggshell, cream, and must pretend you can see the difference, lest you out yourself as a social pariah who once considered pink paper. God forbid. The stationer's assistant, whose job is to exude judgment without saying a word, hovers nearby, silently daring you to choose the budget option. In Victorian England, the only thing more terrifying than disappointing your mother is disappointing your stationer. But paper is just the beginning. Your invitation must be engraved with the correct script, which means hours squinting at alphabets that look suspiciously identical except for the subtle flourish that marks one as tragically nouveau riche. And then there's the matter of the family crest. Does it go at the top, the bottom, the left-hand corner? Get it wrong, and Cousin Agatha will never let you forget the year you accidentally aligned the family crest with the RSVP line, a faux pas so grievous that your children will still be apologizing for it at future weddings. Once you've selected the design, you face the Great Victorian Invitation Audit. Each card is inspected, held up to the light, and judged by a council of elders for thickness, sheen, and the appropriate snap when flicked with a fingernail. The envelopes must be lined, but not ostentatiously so, Unless, of course, you're attempting to impress the local baronet, in which case gold filigree is considered merely prudent. Seals are to be waxed, preferably with a family insignia, and, for the ambitious, lightly scented with lavender or rosewater. Overdo the scent, and it's assumed you're masking the smell of social failure. Then comes the ordeal of handwriting the addresses. Victorians take penmanship as seriously as lineage. Each envelope is addressed by hand, and your success depends on the exact tilt of your G, the flourish on your Q, and your ability to avoid ink blots at all costs. Left-handed? Good luck. That's viewed with the same suspicion as eating soup with a fork. If you manage to get through a dozen envelopes without smudging, you may reward yourself with a dry biscuit and a vague sense of accomplishment. The guest list, meanwhile, is a political minefield. Forget inviting people you actually like. This is about strategic alliances and centuries, old grudges. Who gets an invitation? Who gets a mere announcement card? Who is quietly forgotten and destined to nurse a lifelong resentment? Every name must be discussed, debated, and weighed for potential backlash. Great-aunt Minerva is still feuding with Mrs. Whittaker over the jam debacle of 1847, but excluding her risks a family rift and an annual Christmas card campaign of pointed snubs. And don't imagine for a second that anyone's going to RSVP promptly. Victorian guests treat the invitation as the opening gambit in a game of social chess. Some will respond instantly with florid notes praising your taste. Others will hold out, waiting to see if anyone more fashionable accepts first. A few will show up unannounced, and at least one will claim the invitation was lost in the post, a time-honoured excuse for last-minute drama. Once the invitations are finally sent, the wait begins. Every day, you endure the suspense of the postman's arrival, knowing your entire social future might hinge on a single reply written in suspiciously flowery script. Did Lady Ponsonby accept? Did Mr. Withers decline because of the envelope's texture? Will you be remembered as the bride who sent invitations on cardstock that was almost écru but, in the cold light of day, was actually just cream? Victorian invitations are less about letting people know when to show up and more about proving, in embossed ink and unspoken snobbery, that you know exactly where you stand in the social hierarchy. So as you lick each envelope, say a small prayer to the gods of etiquette and hope that your descendants never have to apologize for your choice of stationery. After all, in the Victorian wedding, everything is judged, but nothing more so than the paper it's written on. Before the wedding, the groom is whisked away for a night of celebration, which typically involves tepid punch, polite jokes, and an embarrassing story about his first time falling off a horse. Wild, right? If you're picturing a riotous evening of drinking, dancing, and regretful tattoo decisions, let's adjust expectations immediately. The Victorian bachelor party, often called a stag night, is less Las Vegas, more village hall with doilies. Picture a group of men with impressive facial hair and questionable waistcoats, sitting very upright on scratchy chairs and pretending not to notice that someone has already spilled sherry on the carpet. The rowdiest part of the evening might be the heated debate over whether the beef pie is overcooked or simply misunderstood. The event usually begins with a toast, never too enthusiastic, as passion is suspicious in this context, followed by a round of mild anecdotes about the groom's childhood misdemeanors. There's the classic story of the time he mistook the housemaid's bonnet for a pigeon and chased her down the lane, or the unforgettable episode when he tried to grow sideburns at 14 and emerged from the ordeal looking like an anxious badger. Laughter is polite, but not too loud. Any guest who dares to guffaw risks a stern look from the eldest uncle, who considers anything above a chuckle to be the first sign of social decay. Food and drink are essential, but Victorian excess is a myth, unless you count the sheer number of cold meats. There's tepid punch, heavy on the lemon, suspiciously light on the spirits, an array of jellied things that wobble in ways nature never intended, and at least one cheese that could double as a murder weapon. The bravest soul might sneak in a flask of something stronger, but he'll spend the night nervously scanning for the vicar before every sip. Games are, technically, allowed, but nothing so vulgar as cards or dice. Instead, there may be a quiz on the groom's ability to recite poetry after 2 glasses of claret, or a round of consequences where the biggest risk is accidentally revealing you once courted a barmaid from Kent. Occasionally, someone suggests charades, at which point everyone pretends to be fascinated by the canapés until the danger passes. The real entertainment is the roast, a gentle, slightly awkward roasting of the groom's foibles and future prospects. The best man might recount the time the groom attempted to impress his intended by reciting Shakespeare and got as far as, "Shall I compare thee to Omparsnip?" before being overcome with nerves. Or there's the legendary moment at last year's cricket match, when he tripped over his own bat and invented a dance now referred to as the hopeless waltz. Everyone laughs, including the groom, who has been told by generations of ancestors never to show embarrassment, no matter how many stories about his youthful bathing habits are shared. As the night continues, the mischief peaks with someone sneaking an extra sugar cube into the punch, or moving the host's prized umbrella stand 2 inches to the left. For the daring, there may be a midnight stroll to the garden, where the men stand shivering, discussing the relative merits of top hats and the worrying political climate. Cigars are lit, coats are buttoned, and the bachelor glances longingly at his bed, wondering if it's too soon to fake a headache. The hangover, such as it is less a result of excess alcohol and more from consuming 4 kinds of aspic and staying up an hour past the usual bedtime. In the morning, the groom wakes with a mild sense of shame and the knowledge that somewhere in the village, at least one person now knows about the unfortunate incident with the goose and the lawnmower. Victorian bachelor parties aren't about chaos. They're about bonding over bland food, commemorating minor humiliations, and gently ushering the groom into matrimony with his dignity mostly intact. As stag nights go, it's not much, unless you count the mild indigestion, the polite laughter, and the knowledge that, for one night at least, you were permitted to be wild. Victorian bridal showers are less about fun and more about strategic gift-giving and thinly veiled jabs about your future housekeeping skills. Expect to unwrap a lot of silver spoons and cryptic advice about pleasing your husband. The party is always hosted by the aunt with the largest drawing room and the fewest surviving houseplants, her furniture shrouded in antimacassars and her walls lined with portraits of stern ancestors glaring disapprovingly at the punch bowl. As the guests arrive, bonnets bobbing, gloves white and pristine, each one brings a gift selected with care, calculation, and just a dash of psychological warfare. Nothing says welcome to married life like a monogrammed rolling pin and a side-eye from your new mother-in-law. The atmosphere is deceptively cheerful. There are cakes, usually fruit cakes, which have an average shelf life of 120 years, and tiny sandwiches filled with ingredients so mysterious, even the family dog won't touch them. Tea is served in cups so delicate that one hard stare could shatter them, and everyone takes turns balancing their saucer while making polite conversation about the weather, the latest bishop scandal, and who may or may not be in a delicate condition. Gift opening is a public spectacle. The bride perches on a dainty chair, trying not to appear too eager or too indifferent, as each present is handed over with the sort of meaningful glance you'd expect from someone about to issue a challenge in a Jane Austen duel. There are endless doilies, decorative thimbles, and at least one practical yet ominous bottle of smelling salts. Every item comes with a suggestion: a casserole dish, for those evenings when the roast turns out a little dry, or a sewing kit, in case your new husband should tear his trousers doing manly things. No one says what they mean. "You'll need this pastry brush for your new kitchen" is code for "we hope you've learned to bake, or your marriage is doomed." A set of linen napkins, just like the ones my mother gave me, really means "don't embarrass me at Sunday dinner." The advice flows as freely as the sherry. Keep your husband's boots polished, and his spirits will follow. Never let the sun set on an argument, unless you're absolutely certain you're right. Always remember, dear, the best marriages are built on patience, trust, and a firm understanding of how to launder lace. The giggling is constant but always carefully contained, a fluttering of fans behind which real opinions are exchanged. Of course, every wife must know how to make blancmange. You do know how to make blancmange, don't you, dear? If not, there's a cookbook, gifted, naturally, by the aunt who once boiled potatoes into submission. And then comes the sabotage, gentle but unmistakable. The bride's future sister-in-law presents a lace tablecloth and remarks that lace is so very hard to keep clean, especially with little ones running about. A cousin hands over a jar of pickled onions and says she's included her famous recipe, which, as family legend has it, once sent Uncle George to bed for a week. The subtext is clear: marriage is a contest, and the game has already begun. For the bride, it's a balancing act. She must appear gracious but not greedy, skilled but never boastful, grateful for every candlestick and conversation spoon. Every thank you note is a diplomatic mission. Thank you for the butter churn. I shall think of you each time it churn. She files away every piece of advice, every whispered warning, every elaborate instruction on removing wine stains from brocade, and wonders quietly if she wouldn't rather elope to the seaside with a suitcase and her favourite teacup. But for all its sniping and subterfuge, the bridal shower is also a strange rite of passage. It's the moment when a bride steps out of girlhood and into the wild, mysterious, and slightly exhausting world of Victorian marriage. As she gathers her gifts and prepares to leave, she's laden with more than just household goods. She carries the collective hopes, anxieties, and judgments of an entire generation of women. The party may end, but the advice, often as indestructible as the fruitcake, will last a lifetime. Welcome to married life, dear. Try not to burn the blancmange. You're not truly ready to be a Victorian bride until you've been sewn into a gown so white it could blind a lighthouse keeper. Each ruffle is a statement. Each pearl is a subtle threat to anyone who thought they could outdress you. The quest for the perfect Victorian wedding dress begins months in advance and quickly takes on the intensity of a military campaign. Mothers, aunts, and half the local millinery industry descend on dressmakers like a flock of judgmental swans, each one convinced she alone possesses the secret knowledge of tool. The dress must be handmade. Of course, no self-respecting family would risk their reputation on anything less than a garment that takes at least 3 women and 1 exhausted seamstress to assemble. Every layer, every pleat, every strategically placed ribbon is meticulously planned. This is less about fashion and more about staking your claim on the social food chain. White isn't just a colour. In the Victorian imagination, white is moral superiority, financial success, and the ability to keep things clean despite the near-constant presence of coal dust. Queen Victoria herself set the fashion by wearing white at her own wedding, and every bride since has been locked in an escalating arms race of brightness. Ivory is for the faint of heart. Cream is for the indecisive. Only blinding, unapologetic white will do, the kind of shade that suggests your family can afford laundry services and that you've never, ever rolled around in a muddy field. Selecting the fabric is a multi-generational negotiation. There's silk for opulence, lace for delicacy, and taffeta for the unmistakable sound it makes when you move. Think of it as the Victorian equivalent of a warning siren. Everything is layered: underskirts, overskirts, bustles and petticoats, thick enough to survive a minor carriage accident. Each piece is fitted, refitted, and adjusted until you could be used to demonstrate the principle of structural engineering. Trying on the dress is a trial by fire. It's you, a forest of mirrors, and the entire female population of your household squeezed into a fitting room, offering a chorus of opinions. A little more length in the sleeve, I think. Does it need another bow? Can we fit another row of ruffles along the hem? The answer is always yes. More ruffles, more bows, more evidence that you are in fact the bride, and not some upstart cousin with designs on your spotlight. And then there are the accessories. Veil as long as a minor novel? Check. Shoes that could never be worn outdoors? Absolutely. Pearls for purity, orange blossoms for fertility, and a sprig of myrtle tucked somewhere for luck, preferably hidden in case anyone mistakes you for sentimental. Gloves, fans, a dainty handkerchief, and the all-important something borrowed, usually Aunt Hester's garter, which nobody has washed since the Crimean War. On the day itself, dressing is a team effort. You stand still while being laced, buttoned, and pinned, gradually losing sensation in everything from your collarbone down. Corset strings are pulled so tight you could rival a well-tuned harp. At least 2 people are responsible for arranging the train, and there is always one cousin whose sole job is to run interference between you and any source of dirt, rain, or small children armed with jam. Of course, all eyes are on you when you make your entrance. You shimmer, or possibly creak, down the stairs, aware that every guest, neighbour and rival is inspecting your gown for flaws. The local newspaper may report on the remarkable whiteness or bold display of lace. If you're very lucky, someone faints from admiration, or the fumes from too much lavender water. If you're unlucky, a jealous cousin whispers that she saw a nearly identical dress last season in Bath. The Victorian wedding dress isn't just clothing. It's a statement, a shield, and a high-stakes social gambit. To wear it is to announce, loudly and wordlessly, that you are worthy of notice, approval, and maybe, just maybe, eternal happiness. Or at least, a decent review in next week's local paper. Bridesmaids, or as Victorians called them, living cautionary tales. Their job is to look similar enough to the bride to ward off evil spirits, but not so good that anyone mistakes them for the main event. In theory, being chosen as a bridesmaid is a great honour. In practice, it's a masterclass in passive-aggressive pageantry and collective discomfort. The moment you receive the invitation, usually delivered by hand, with the barely concealed desperation of someone who's already lost 3 cousins to elopement, you know you're in for a day of ruffles, ribbons, and relentless self-sacrifice. The Victorians believed that evil spirits were obsessed with crashing weddings and confusing the bride, which meant dressing her attendants in similarly frilly, pastel confections was considered less friendship and more spiritual misdirection. It's like camouflage, but with more bows. Outfits are selected not for comfort or personal style, but for maximum uniformity and minimal individuality. This is an era before online shopping, so expect a multi-day ordeal at the local dressmakers, where you and your fellow bridesmaids are fitted for matching gowns in a shade described as ethereal lavender, but known locally as the colour of a frightened parsnip. The goal is to create a visual wall of ruffles and sashes, each one a little less extravagant than the bride's dress, but still excessive enough that you could be mistaken for a high society cake. Accessories, too, are subject to intense scrutiny. Each bridesmaid is given a bouquet, gloves, and sometimes a peculiar hat that serves no practical purpose, except to keep conversation lively. Shoes must match, which is unfortunate because Victorian shoe sizing is about as reliable as weather forecasting. Woe betide the girl whose feet are just a bit unique. The solution? Grin, bear it, and hope you don't have to walk further than the church steps. On the big day, the suffering is a group activity. You are woken before dawn to begin the elaborate rituals of hair curling, corset tightening, and collective anxiety. Everyone is armed with hairpins and an emergency supply of smelling salts. If you're lucky, your dress fits. If you're less lucky, you spend the day negotiating with a waistband that's determined to leave a permanent dent in your anatomy. There is always one cousin who faints, one who tears her hem, and one who finds herself inexplicably in possession of a frog. No one asks questions. During the ceremony, you're stationed in a strategic formation, close enough to the bride to draw away any wandering spirits, but not so close as to steal focus. Your job is to smile serenely, hold flowers, and avoid making eye contact with any eligible bachelors in the front row. Each bridesmaid has memorized the 3 approved expressions: delighted for my friend, graceful support, and please let this end before my feet go numb. The walk down the aisle is a delicate ballet of synchronized suffering. You glide, you trip, you nudge each other into place, If someone stumbles, you collectively pretend it never happened. If someone's bonnet begins to slip, another bridesmaid surreptitiously adjusts it. United in discomfort, you become a temporary sisterhood, bonded by shared humiliation and the knowledge that your likeness will be immortalized in an oil painting, looking slightly dazed and distinctly unenthusiastic. After the vows, there's the group portrait. You're instructed to stand a little closer and just tilt your head, dear, while the photographer arranges you like floral arrangements that might wilt at any moment. The result? A tableau of women smiling with the polite terror of those who have just realized they're expected to dance at the reception, despite wearing shoes made for looking at, not moving in. But there is camaraderie too. Between furtive giggles and whispered critiques of the groomsmen's cravats, the bridesmaids find solace in shared ordeal. You exchange horror stories of previous weddings, plot your escape to the refreshments table, and quietly vow never to choose ethereal lavender for anything ever again. In the end, being a Victorian bridesmaid is about more than just warding off evil or providing background colour for the main event. It's about friendship, fortitude, and the realization that sometimes the best memories come wrapped in too much tulle and just a bit of lace-induced suffering. After all, nothing says bonding like matching bonnets and a story you'll tell for decades. Before the main event, you gather for a practice run, mainly so everyone can argue over seating arrangements and the best way to avoid tripping over the church's ancient rug. The Victorian wedding rehearsal is supposed to instill calm, but really, it's just a polite way to let every participant panic in a socially sanctioned setting. Picture a congregation of anxious relatives and bewildered friends shuffling in and out of pews, clutching crumpled programs, and looking for excuses to visit the punch table early. The church smells faintly of mothballs, damp hymnals, and, by the end of the evening, collective despair. Right away, the trouble starts with the seating. Victorian etiquette demands that everyone be placed with mathematical precision, according to a complex algorithm involving bloodlines, property holdings, and whether or not two relatives once fought over a gravy boat at Christmas. Aunt Agnes must never sit within 3 pews of Cousin Percy. Not after the incident, and the entire left side of the aisle is reserved for the bride's family, except for Uncle Hubert, who must be kept within eyesight to prevent unsanctioned interjections. Next comes the all-important procession practice. The bride's father is rehearsing his dignified but not too pleased walk. The bridesmaids line up like pastel dominoes, nervously checking their gloves and wondering who will be the first to step on their own hem. The groomsmen stand around, attempting to look helpful, but mostly shuffling their feet and debating whether their cravats are rakish or just sad. The officiant, a vicar with the patience of a stone, attempts to organize the chaos with the gentle authority of someone who has seen it all before and wishes he hadn't. There is, inevitably, a problem with the church's ancient rug. No one can decide whether to smooth it, move it, or simply pray that no one goes down in a heap of petticoats during the ceremony. Suggestions are offered: roll it up, bad luck; nail it down, sacrilege; or sprinkle it with holy water, not again after last year. Eventually, a compromise is reached. Someone is appointed as the rug watcher, whose sole responsibility is to issue subtle warnings if any member of the wedding party drifts into the hazardous zone. Cue the practice vows, which always descend into giggles or awkward silences. The bride forgets her line. The groom forgets to speak. The best man, who thought he was only there to hand over the rings, is now reading the entire ceremony because the vicar has temporarily lost his place. Meanwhile, the flower girl has eaten half her petals, and the ring bearer is attempting to crawl under the altar. Every mishap is recorded in the collective family memory for future storytelling. At some point, the rehearsal devolves into an impromptu debate about the reception, which relatives are prone to over-celebrating, who should be kept away from the pickled onions, and whether it's possible to avoid the children's choir singing all 5 verses of Bless This House. Grandparents offer advice no one asked for. In my day, we tied cans to the carriage and hoped for the best, while mothers hover in corners, plotting defensive strategies for the inevitable wardrobe malfunctions. Through it all, there's a background hum of nervous energy, barely contained by the trappings of civility. Someone always gets lost en route to the vestry. Someone else bursts into tears after realizing they've memorized the wrong cue. The rehearsal is less about perfecting the ceremony and more about exposing every possible flaw, in the hope that, by naming your disasters in advance, you can somehow keep them at bay. By the time it's over, everyone is exhausted, underfed, and quietly considering whether elopement is still a viable option. The vicar pronounces the rehearsal a success, which in Victorian terms means no one fainted or was disinherited. The church empties, the rug remains in its treacherous glory, and the wedding party disperses to brace for the real thing. In the end, the rehearsal is a rite of passage, a shared exercise in nerves, negotiation, and the subtle art of managing expectations. If you can survive the chaos of practicing disaster, the actual ceremony will feel, by comparison, like a pleasant walk down an aisle with just the occasional detour around a strategically placed rug. If you're not tossing and turning in a cold sweat, worrying about omens and forgotten vows, are you even getting married in Victorian England? The night before, a Victorian wedding is less of a peaceful prelude and more of a marathon of anxiety, tradition, and last-minute disasters. Your job isn't to sleep, it's to stew in an exquisite blend of nerves, superstition, and the kind of family chaos that only emerges after dark. This is not the calm before the storm. This is the storm, complete with thunderous whispering outside your door and the relentless tap of Great Aunt Judith's cane as she prowls the corridors, ready to chase away any ill luck that might be lurking near the bridal suite. Every family has its own set of superstitions, and they all seem to converge on this one night. No bride must see the groom after sunset. No one should mention the word rain. Flowers must be kept fresh and upright. Mirrors must be covered, and at least 2 relatives are on constant alert for signs of bad omens. A crow on the windowsill, a dog howling at midnight, or, worst of all, someone accidentally saying wedding in a tone that suggests doom rather than delight. Even the cat is in on the action, keeping a suspicious eye on every shadow, presumably in case evil spirits try to sneak in disguised as a wayward bouquet. You, meanwhile, are sequestered in your childhood bedroom or some overly ruffled guest room, surrounded by a battalion of female relatives who are determined to keep you occupied. They tell you stories of their own weddings, each one more fraught with near misses and narrow escapes than the last. There's always the tale of someone who forgot her garter, only to be rescued at the last minute by a kindly footman and a conveniently placed ribbon. Another relative will recount the tragedy of the missing ring, eventually found in the dog's mouth just moments before the ceremony. These stories are meant to comfort you, but mainly serve as a reminder of just how many things can go wrong. The panic doesn't stop at storytelling. Every detail is checked, then checked again, then checked a third time by someone who definitely already checked it. Is the dress ready? Is the veil straight? Are the gloves spotless and the shoes buffed to a shine? Someone polishes the silver hairpins for the 100th time, and another person mends the hem of your petticoat while reciting prayers to ward off wardrobe disaster. If you so much as sigh, 3 people leap up with smelling salts and a stern warning not to invite the vapors. You try to rest, but sleep is for the uninitiated. There's the constant hum of whispered advice floating under your door. Remember to smile at the altar, dear. Don't lock your knees. If you feel faint, just focus on the bishop's eyebrows. Every creak of the house is a potential sign that something has gone awry. Did someone remember to tie blue ribbons to the garters? Has anyone seen the ring? Is that a mouse in the wainscoting, or just a very judgmental cricket? Meanwhile, your mind cycles through every possible disaster. Fainting at the altar, tripping on the aisle rug, accidentally saying the groom's middle name instead of his first. You know the one. Everyone does. And then there are the omens. A clock stopping at midnight, bad luck, shoes pointing the wrong way, catastrophe. Someone dreaming of a thunderstorm. Time to double up on the lucky charms and add a sprig of rosemary to your bouquet for extra protection. You're not a bride so much as a contestant in a high-stakes game of Victorian superstition bingo. As the night wears on, you may drift into a shallow, restless doze, dreaming of lace and lilies and relatives waving handkerchiefs like surrender flags. Just as you begin to relax, someone bursts in with a final reminder. No looking in mirrors after midnight. You sigh. Wrap yourself tighter in the world's itchiest nightgown and promise yourself that next time you'll elope and skip the panic entirely. At last, dawn creeps in through the curtains. You're tired, frazzled, and running on adrenaline, but you've survived. The sun is shining, hopefully. The omens have been mostly positive, and you're about to embark on the biggest and possibly most dramatic day of your Victorian life. Congratulations. If you can handle the night before, you might just be ready for the wedding itself. The morning of the wedding starts with a stiff breakfast and even stiffer nerves. Victorian superstition dictates the bride must eat something dry and bland. Just like her future marriage, according to her mother-in-law. It's dawn in the family home, and the house is already vibrating with the sound of anxious footsteps and clinking china. You are woken not by bird song, but by an army of relatives whispering at a volume that can only be described as stage whisper plus. The air is thick with a mixture of lavender water and barely concealed panic. Today, you are not allowed a lie-in. Today, you are marched to the breakfast table with the solemnity of someone heading off to battle. Or, more accurately, a 3-hour sermon on the virtues of quiet suffering. Victorian wedding day breakfast is not a feast. It is a dry run for the discipline required in married life. On the table, thin slices of toast that have cooled to a cardboard consistency, plain tea, no sugar, lest you tempt fate, and, if your family is particularly daring, a solitary boiled egg. No fruit, no cakes, and definitely nothing rich or indulgent. Heaven forbid you actually enjoy yourself before the big event. It's widely believed that a bland meal will ensure a calm stomach and an even calmer spirit. After all, nothing says prepared for matrimony quite like nibbling on a rusk and pretending you're not counting the minutes to your own emotional doom. The bride is seated at the head of the table, flanked by sisters and aunts who are determined to keep her upright and unwrinkled. Every bite she takes is observed with clinical precision. Slowly, dear. Chew each mouthful 12 times. No butter. It's far too slippery. Someone recounts the cautionary tale of a cousin who once dared to eat marmalade on her wedding day and had to excuse herself halfway through the vows. The lesson: joy is for after the honeymoon, and citrus is an instrument of chaos. The groom, meanwhile, fares no better. Somewhere across town, he is equally beset by well-meaning relatives, insisting he line his stomach with dry bread and strong black tea. The men at his table pass around stories of weddings gone wrong, a groom fainting from hunger, another from eating too much, and a third who vanished into the garden after an unfortunate encounter with a pickled onion. All agree that the safest path is the simplest one. Eat nothing, say nothing, and for heaven's sake, don't spill anything on your cravat. As the bride attempts to choke down her breakfast, she is also treated to a buffet of last-minute advice. Remember to hold your bouquet low. Stand tall but not so tall, you overshadow the groom. If your knees start to tremble, just think about kittens. The older women in the room offer tales from their own wedding mornings, some comforting, most not. "I was so nervous I nearly ate my veil," confides one aunt, which is not the comfort you were hoping for as you stare at your own slice of flavourless toast. There is little room for quiet contemplation. The breakfast table is a hive of activity, with maids bustling in and out, refilling teacups, adjusting sashes, and reminding everyone that the carriage will arrive promptly, unless the horse has other ideas. The youngest siblings dart beneath the table, hoping for crumbs or a peek at the mysterious wedding slippers. The bride's father offers a weak smile, already deep in thought about speeches, debts, and the likelihood of rain. Throughout it all, nerves hum just beneath the surface. Every swallow is a tiny act of bravery, each sip of tea a silent prayer for smooth sailing. There's an undercurrent of excitement, yes, but it's tangled up with the practical anxiety of what comes next. Layers of lace, the all-seeing eyes of the congregation, and vows you've rehearsed so many times they've started to lose all meaning. At last, the meal ends. Plates are cleared, teacups stacked, and the family rises with the sense that a great ordeal has already been overcome. The bride is whisked away for dressing, and the kitchen staff exchange knowing looks, grateful that the only casualty was a single piece of toast dropped on the carpet. So begins the Victorian wedding day. With dry toast, dry humour, and the kind of nerves that only centuries of tradition can produce. If you can survive breakfast, you might just survive the rest. Wedding morning is a logistical nightmare of lacing, pinning, and stern reminders to stand up straight, dear. Corsets are tightened, tears are dabbed, and someone's always lost a shoe. From the moment breakfast ends, the house erupts into a whirlwind of activity that would make a beehive seem tranquil. The bride is immediately swept away to her designated dressing chamber, an overheated, slightly claustrophobic room filled with the scent of starch, rosewater, and rising panic. Half a dozen female relatives descend upon her with the coordinated chaos of a Formula One pit crew, each armed with some vital wedding day implement, a hairbrush, a bouquet of pins, a small glass of sherry for the nerves, and the family's time-honoured collection of lace handkerchiefs. First, the underpinnings. The bride steps into a fortress of petticoats, chemises, stockings, and at least 2 layers of mysterious Victorian shapewear. Each piece must be arranged, straightened, and inspected for so much as a loose thread. The corset comes next, a feat of Victorian engineering, designed less for comfort and more for the creation of an hourglass figure that says, "I am ready for marriage and possibly also a duel." Tightening the corset is a group effort. Someone holds, someone laces, and someone else offers encouragement in the form of breathe, but not too much. There are always at least 2 false starts, 3 wrong holes, and a last-minute debate over whether the laces are even. The dress itself is a marvel and a menace. Layers of silk, lace, and tulle that somehow manage to weigh more than a family-sized fruitcake. It takes 3 people just to maneuver the gown over the bride's carefully arranged hair, which is being simultaneously curled, braided, and shellacked into submission by a distant cousin with strong opinions on fringe. Every button is a potential crisis. Every ribbon is an opportunity for sabotage by an overzealous bridesmaid or an uncooperative cat. Accessories follow. Shoes that were purchased for beauty, not for function. Gloves so tight they threaten to cut off circulation. A veil that refuses to drape correctly, despite the collective willpower of the entire assembly. There is always one item missing, usually a shoe or a garter, and it is eventually discovered in the least likely place, beneath the flower girl, inside a hat box, or somehow already at the church. A small search party is dispatched, and the level of tension in the room rises accordingly. Through all this, emotions run high. There are nerves and nerves pretending to be stoicism. Someone inevitably begins to weep, sometimes the bride, more often an aunt who is overcome by memories of her own wedding, or possibly just the fumes from the lavender water. Smelling salts are produced, tears are dabbed, and stern reminders are issued. No red eyes for the wedding photos. Smile, but not too widely. It's unseemly. Stand up straight, for heaven's sake. You don't want to look like you're surrendering. Instructions rain down from every corner. Don't forget your something blue. Is that your grandmother's brooch, or the one from the biscuit tin? For the last time, don't lean on the dresser. It's not been sturdy since 1842. Every detail is fussed over. Every decision is subject to debate. The clock ticks relentlessly toward the hour, and the atmosphere oscillates between giddy excitement and existential dread. Finally, the finishing touches. Perfume is dabbed, stray threads are clipped, and someone smooths down the bride's hair for the 10th and, hopefully, final time. The assembled helpers step back, surveying their handiwork with the satisfaction of artists admiring a completed masterpiece. The bride is transformed, radiant, and ready to face the greatest walk of her life if she can still breathe. With a final flurry of hugs, reminders, and last-minute lint checks, the door opens and the bride emerges, nerves taut but head held high. If she can survive the chaos of getting dressed, the ceremony itself will feel like a stroll through a very well-decorated battlefield. The actual wedding is a solemn parade of vows, hymns, and knowing glances from relatives who survived their own nuptials. Sneeze during the Lord's Prayer, and you'll never live it down. As you step into the church, the air is thick with expectation and enough perfume to send a medium-sized dog into a faint. The building is packed. Friends, family, distant relations who turned up for the free food, and a few neighbours who simply enjoyed drama in a sacred setting. Victorian ceremonies are not known for brevity, and today will be no exception. The organist begins with a tune so grand it shakes the dust from the rafters and probably a few spiders from the pews. The walk down the aisle is both a triumph and a trial. The bride floats, totters, in her vast white gown, escorted by her father, who is visibly sweating through 3 layers of starched shirt. The bridesmaids form a pastel phalanx behind her, clutching bouquets and reciting the one instruction drilled into them: do not upstage the bride. Meanwhile, the groom stands at the altar, oscillating between awe, terror, and the grim determination to remember which hand to use for the ring. Every guest becomes an unofficial judge. Great Aunt Millicent is squinting for signs of improper embroidery. Mrs. Ponsonby has brought opera glasses and is whispering running commentary to her husband. Even the local vicar, who has presided over enough weddings to write a novella, keeps a keen eye out for anything that might hint at future scandal. Any slight deviation from tradition, whether it's a poorly timed cough or the wrong hymn number, will be discussed for years to come. The ceremony itself is heavy on ritual and light on spontaneity. You stand in exactly the right spot, say exactly the right words, and try not to look too nervous, lest a cousin interpret it as a sign of secret regret. The vows are recited in carefully measured tones, each phrase weighed down with centuries of expectation. One slip, stumbling over solemnly or pausing too long before a bay, and you'll be the talk of the town. The congregation belts out hymns with varying levels of enthusiasm, the effect being somewhere between a stirring chorus and a communal plea for mercy. Then come the readings, each chosen for their ability to strike the right note of moral fortitude and emotional restraint. There's always one uncle who reads in a tone usually reserved for funeral processions, and another who mispronounces a crucial word, much to the delight of every child in attendance. The prayers are long and the seats unforgiving, and by the time the blessing arrives, most people are either contemplating their own mortality or eyeing the floral arrangements for potential snacks. The exchange of rings is performed with the precision of a royal coronation. Hands are extended, rings are produced, hopefully by the best man and not, as once happened in family legend, by the page boy who tried to eat them. The officiant pronounces the couple husband and wife, and there is a collective exhale. If the bride manages not to faint and the groom remembers to smile, it's considered a triumph. But even in this moment of union, tradition looms large. The newlyweds must not look too giddy, nor too somber. Balance is everything. The first kiss is executed with the restrained affection of 2 people who have read extensively about the dangers of public displays. The congregation erupts into polite applause, peppered with knowing winks from those who remember their own big day, and possibly a few who are still recovering. As the ceremony draws to a close, the happy couple turns to face the congregation, showered in blessings and the sharp gaze of everyone tallying the success of each ritual. The recessional begins, the organ bellows once more, and you make your way down the aisle as newlyweds, official, exhausted, and already anticipating the next gauntlet, surviving the reception. Because in Victorian England, love might be patient and kind, but a wedding is all about surviving the ritual, one tightly choreographed step at a time. Walking down the aisle is easy. Unless your dress weighs more than you, your shoes are 3 sizes too small, and the flower girl is already sobbing. The moment arrives. The church doors swing open with a creak that echoes off the stone walls and into your chest cavity, just in case your heart wasn't already doing cartwheels. Heads turn in unison, like sunflowers following the light, only with more judgment and a dash of schadenfreude. You take your first step onto the aisle runner, a dazzling expanse of white linen, expertly placed and yet, somehow, still bunched in all the wrong places. This is no ordinary walk. This is the Victorian Olympic event of processional endurance and balance. The first challenge is the dress. It trails behind you in a cloud of lace and overambition, threatening to snag on every pew, shoe buckle, and stray hymn book along the way. You hold the bouquet just so, but the veil insists on floating into your face with every draft, like a friendly yet intrusive ghost. Each step feels like wading through molasses in a snowstorm, with your corset pulled so tight you can barely breathe, and the collective gaze of the congregation fixed on your progress. You're suddenly aware that your only real options are forward or public fainting. Then there's the shoes, chosen for their delicate satin and decorative bows, not for their respect for the human foot. They pinch in places you didn't know existed. After 3 steps, your toes have gone numb. After 6, you're considering the pros and cons of simply kicking them off and finishing the walk in your stockings. Unfortunately, Victorian etiquette frowns on barefoot brides. Unless, of course, it's a Greek revival wedding, which this most certainly is not. You are not alone. The bridesmaids glide behind you in synchronized suffering, forming a pastel procession and desperately whispering encouragements through gritted teeth. The flower girl, bravely clutching her basket of petals, has already dissolved into tears, her nerves shot from the pressure and the weight of a dress twice her size. You catch her eye and manage a reassuring smile, which only makes her sob louder. She is now a walking metaphor for everyone's emotional state. The aisle stretches before you, impossibly long. Every step is carefully choreographed. Don't go too fast. Don't go too slow. Don't step on your own hem. And above all, don't trip. There are obstacles everywhere. A loose rug, a rogue button, an enthusiastic cousin leaning too far into the aisle for the perfect sketch. As you pass each row, you're greeted by a flurry of fans, surreptitious sniffles, and the occasional scandalized gasp from someone who's decided the lace on your train is simply too modern. The music swells. The organist, who has played the same tune for every wedding since Waterloo, picks up the tempo just as you hit the halfway point. It's now or never. You keep your chin up, shoulders back, bouquet steady, and shoes, well, your shoes are probably planning a mutiny, but you keep moving regardless. The congregation seems to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable slip, the stumble, the grand spectacle that will live in family legend for generations. At last, you reach the altar. The relief is overwhelming. You haven't tripped, fainted, or accidentally launched your bouquet into the choir stalls. The groom gives you a look that is equal parts admiration and terror. He knows how close you came to disaster. Behind you, the flower girl has collapsed in a heap of tulle and sniffles, her job done for the day. The bridesmaids reassemble, smoothing each other's sleeves and quietly congratulating themselves on making it through the world's most stressful parade. As the congregation settles, you catch your breath and allow yourself a small, secret victory. You've conquered the aisle, the shoes, the veil, and the ever-present risk of public embarrassment. Now, all you have to do is survive the vows, the toasts, and the dancing with hopefully fewer wardrobe malfunctions. Because in Victorian England, the wedding march isn't just a walk, it's a gauntlet. And if you can make it from door to altar with your dignity, mostly, intact, you can handle anything that comes next, flower girls, shoes, and all. As the couple stammers through their vows, the entire church listens intently, mostly to see if someone forgets a line or faints from the pressure. This is the moment everyone has been waiting for. Well, not the happy couple, who would much rather be anywhere else, but certainly the congregation. The hush that falls over the pews is so profound you can hear the vicar's shoes squeak on the ancient stone floor. In the Victorian era, vows aren't just words. They're a public spectacle, and every syllable is a potential headline for next week's social column. Eyes are fixed on you, ears straining for a missed word, and the only thing standing between you and scandal is your ability to recite memorized lines while breathing in a corset and not weeping openly. The vicar begins with a solemn address, his tone suggesting that this is both a holy rite and a prime opportunity for a little light judgment. You are asked, in a voice that echoes to the rafters, to love, honor, and obey, the last word drawing a few pointed glances from the more progressive cousins and a knowing smirk from the mother-in-law. Your hands may be shaking as you clutch your partner's, but you try desperately to focus on the familiar rhythm of the words you've rehearsed in your head and whispered nervously into your pillow for the past month. The groom goes first. He speaks in a voice that wavers between confidence and existential terror. He may stumble over the forsaking all others bit, causing an aunt in the third row to arch an eyebrow so high it disappears beneath her hat. The bride's turn arrives, and the room leans forward as one. The pressure is immense. Get the words wrong, and you'll be immortalized in family legend as the one who couldn't promise to cherish. Some brave souls have fainted at this point, but most grit their teeth and soldier on, all too aware of the great aunt who once corrected a vicar mid-ceremony and lived to tell the tale for 4 decades. And all the while, the congregation is not just listening, they're critiquing. Was that a slight hesitation before "till death do us part"? Did the bride's voice quiver when she promised to obey? Are those tears from emotion, nerves, or the realization that someone forgot to powder her nose? Each detail is mentally logged, ready to be dissected over tea for years to come. The best man shifts uncomfortably. The bridesmaids whisper encouraging nothings, and the flower girl, having recovered from her earlier sobbing fit, is watching with wide, slightly judgmental eyes. There's also the issue of the ring. Passing the ring at the correct moment requires coordination not seen since the Crimean War. The best man fumbles in his pocket, always the wrong one. The vicar waits patiently, and the ring finally appears, glinting with the hope that it won't be dropped. There's a collective inhale as the groom slides it onto the bride's finger, hoping her hands aren't too clammy from nerves, or that the fit isn't suddenly questionable. If the ring sticks, a nervous laugh ripples through the church. If it glides on easily, it's considered a sign of good luck, or, at the very least, decent planning. At the climactic I do, there's a visible relaxation among the wedding party, though the congregation is still poised, eager for the next dramatic moment. The vicar, satisfied that all vows have been satisfactorily delivered, pronounces the couple married in the eyes of God and every gossipy relative for 3 counties. Somewhere near the back, a small child drops a hymn book, shattering the tension and earning a round of relieved laughter. But before you leave the altar, tradition demands one last silent ritual. The careful exchange of glances between the couple, confirming, "We did it." The real marriage begins now, after surviving Victorian scrutiny, public promises, and the ever-watchful gaze of family. You may never fully relax in a church again, but at least you know. You spoke, you survived, and the only thing anyone will gossip about now is how perfectly you managed not to faint. For a Victorian wedding, that's practically a fairy tale ending. In the Victorian era, even a peck on the cheek is enough to make the front page of the family scandal register. Most kisses are quick, dry, and followed by a chorus of aunts fanning themselves. The first kiss as a married couple is the moment everyone claims to anticipate with romantic excitement. But in reality, it's less swoon-worthy and more like a cautious diplomatic gesture. Forget cinematic embraces or dramatic dips. The Victorian first kiss happens under the steely gaze of the vicar, half the village, and every ancestor you could possibly disappoint. This is not a moment for spontaneity. This is a performance, and the audience is ready to judge. As the newlyweds turn toward each other, there's a collective holding of breath. The older ladies have prepared their smelling salts. The younger cousins are wide-eyed, hoping for a whiff of actual romance. The vicar gives a small, almost imperceptible nod, signaling that the time has come. If you're the groom, you try to look composed. If you're the bride, you try not to let your corset snap from the anticipation. Either way, your cheeks are flushed, your palms are clammy, and you're both acutely aware of being the main attraction in a morality play with lace curtains. The approach is awkward, as Victorian etiquette offers very little practical guidance on how to kiss in public without causing a full-scale panic. Too bold, and you risk being remembered as that shameless couple from 1857. Too timid, and Great Aunt Matilda will declare you doomed to a life of emotional restraint. So, the newlyweds settle on the safest course, the briefest possible kiss. Think of it as a punctuation mark. Swift, polite, and gone before anyone can properly react. There's a rustle through the congregation, fans fluttering, programs snapping, someone coughing pointedly in the back row. Several aunts dab their foreheads and exchange looks that say, "Well, I never." In the gallery, one enterprising child has already started the rumor that he saw everything. In truth, it was probably less physical contact than you'd get from an enthusiastic handshake, but history will record it as the great kiss of the century. Meanwhile, the bride and groom try to maintain composure. The bride, mindful of her carefully applied powder, gives a tiny, dignified nod. The groom stands with the posture of a man who has just successfully negotiated a treaty, or perhaps survived a bear attack. Both parties know that this moment will be recounted at every family gathering for decades, each time growing a little more scandalous, a little more absurd. Of course, some couples aren't so lucky. There's always the risk of logistical mishaps, a veil caught on a button, a hat askew, or the unfortunate incident where a well-meaning kiss lands somewhere near the eyebrow instead. These are the stories that live on long after the cake has been eaten. If a bride's lipstick smudges, it will be spoken of with hushed reverence, as if it were a portent of stormy times ahead. If the groom hesitates, theories abound. Cold feet, cold hands, or perhaps simply an allergy to public displays of affection. The aftermath is a flurry of whispers and sideways glances. A line is drawn between those who found it tasteful and dignified and those who will never recover from the shock. Someone offers the new Mrs. a sip of water. Someone else tries to lighten the mood with a joke about French weddings. But nothing truly dispels the sensation that something slightly improper has occurred. As the newlyweds take their first steps away from the altar, they're trailed by a wake of speculation. Did you see how quick that was? Did you notice the color in her cheeks? Was it love, embarrassment, or simply the effort of holding up her veil in a stiff breeze? For the rest of the day, the kiss is dissected with more vigor than the reception menu. And yet, despite the drama, the nervousness, and the collective Victorian horror at a hint of public intimacy, the first kiss does its job. It marks a beginning, a small, brave moment of closeness amid an ocean of ceremony and expectation. And if it sends half the aunts into a faint, well, that's just a bonus. After all, nothing says newlyweds quite like scandalizing your relatives with a kiss that, by modern standards, wouldn't even raise an eyebrow. After the ceremony, guests shower the couple with everything from flower petals to stale rice. Someone's great-uncle nearly loses an eye. Tradition. The moment the vicar's final blessing echoes through the church and the organ belts out its triumphant finale, the wedding party is swept up in a tide of Victorian enthusiasm. You, the freshly minted couple, find yourself funneled through a gauntlet of well-wishers whose only mission is to overwhelm you with both affection and, if you're not careful, a solid pelting of miscellaneous organic matter. Confetti, in the Victorian sense, could mean almost anything. Dried flower petals, rosebuds, lavender, or, if the budget has run thin, bits of coloured paper snipped from last year's invitations. For the more frugal families, a handful of stale rice will do the trick, much to the regret of anyone standing within arm's reach and not wearing protective eyewear. The ritual of tossing confetti is supposed to symbolize good fortune, prosperity, and fertility, but it tends to feel more like a village-wide invitation to test everyone's throwing arm. Guests line up outside the church, baskets and pockets at the ready, eager to take part in what has become less a gentle shower and more a cross between a ticker-tape parade and a food fight. Someone always gets too enthusiastic, a cousin with a mean right hook, a flower girl armed with a basket nearly as big as she is, or the local prankster who smuggled in a handful of dried peas for extra luck. Before you know it, petals and grains are flying, and the air fills with the sound of laughter, shouts, and the occasional muffled cry of, "Not in the hair, darling." The couple's slow progress down the church steps becomes a minor athletic event. The bride clutches her bouquet like a shield, eyes squinting in anticipation of the next volley. The groom does his best to appear gallant while covertly ducking a rogue handful of rice aimed straight at his cravat. The bridesmaids are not immune either. Those elaborate hairstyles you spent hours constructing, they're now home to a small ecosystem of petals, seeds, and possibly the beginnings of a botanical garden. Victorian etiquette, of course, demands that you accept these blessings with a smile, no matter how much debris makes its way into your shoes or how many small children use you for target practice. Thank you, Aunt Beatrice, for the generous handful of lavender. I'm sure I'll be smelling that for weeks. You nod graciously as yet another guest, who's clearly been waiting for this moment all day, lets loose with a celebratory shower that would put a confetti cannon to shame. But the mayhem isn't limited to just floral matter. There are the well-wishers themselves, relatives, friends, and nosy neighbours who jostle for position to offer their congratulations, each one determined to get in a word, a handshake, or the world's most awkward hug. Some deliver cryptic advice. May you always agree on curtains. Others offer warnings disguised as blessings. Just remember, it's the quiet ones you have to watch. There is the inevitable great uncle who, in the melee, nearly topples backward into the rose bushes, saved only by the swift reflexes of a groomsman who really didn't want another family story added to the list. For the newlyweds, it's a test of endurance, smiling through the barrage, maintaining composure, and occasionally shaking petals out of your hair with the air of someone who's just emerged from a slightly alarming parade. You emerge onto the road, blinking in the sunlight, clothes fragrant with lavender and carpeted with rice, trailed by a line of small children eager to scoop up whatever's left on the ground. The photographer is there to capture the chaos, snapping a picture that will, for generations, encapsulate the exact moment when you realized matrimony is sometimes just a series of small, cheerful attacks from people who love you. And so, the confetti flies, the rice scatters, and the well-wishers deliver their blessings with all the subtlety of a village fete. You made it through the ceremony, and now you're officially seasoned in the art of Victorian celebration. The rest of the day, cake, toasts, awkward dances, will feel easy by comparison. Unless, of course, someone brought extra rice. Tradition. It's not brunch, it's a test of endurance. Multiple courses of tepid beef, cold pies, and jellied things you're not allowed to identify, all eaten while avoiding eye contact with that one cousin. The Victorian wedding breakfast is a paradox. It takes place after noon, involves no eggs or pancakes, and is less about actual nourishment than social navigation. Once the confetti has settled and the last bit of rice has been shaken from your hair, you and your new spouse are swept into the reception hall, a place that smells of polished wood, hothouse flowers, and the faint terror of 100 guests wondering if there will be enough wine. The meal itself is a culinary marathon, designed to showcase family prosperity and stamina more than flavour. The first course arrives with much ceremony. Thin slices of beef that have achieved a temperature somewhere between lukewarm and Victorian hypothermia. These are followed by pies, cold, crusty, and filled with mysterious ingredients that nobody dares to identify for fear of insulting someone's great-grandmother's secret recipe. You smile bravely as you attempt to navigate a plate of aspic, which wiggles menacingly whenever you so much as glance at it. It's unclear whether you're supposed to eat it or challenge it to a duel. Between courses, there is polite conversation. Victorian code for awkward silences interrupted by coughs and the scraping of cutlery. You field questions about the honeymoon, your future plans, and whether you plan to continue the family line, all asked with the forced subtlety of a parade float. There are toasts, each one longer than the last, delivered by relatives determined to relive their own wedding days in excruciating detail. If you're lucky, the speeches are merely embarrassing. If you're less lucky, they're incriminating, featuring anecdotes about childhood escapades involving chamber pots and, once, a goose. As the meal drags on, you realize there are at least 5 more courses to go. Fish, salad, more pies, and a selection of jellied meats that glisten ominously under the chandelier. Each dish comes with its own set of etiquette rules: how to hold your fork, when to use your spoon, and, most importantly, how to smile convincingly while chewing something that tastes like a cold, savory memory. Dessert arrives in the form of dense fruitcakes, candied nuts, and a pudding so alcoholic it could be used as lamp fuel. The older guests reminisce about their own wedding breakfasts. "Ah, we only had 3 courses and a single potato, and we were grateful." While the younger crowd wonders if anyone will notice if they stash their aspic under the nearest fern. You attempt to keep your composure as someone passes you a platter of jellied tongue, nodding as if this is a perfectly normal way to celebrate lifelong commitment. The children at the table eye the cakes with the desperation of miners who've struck gold, while the adults exchange conspiratorial glances over their sherry glasses. Throughout it all, you are the center of attention. Every bite, every sip, every polite chuckle is noted by the room, recorded for future analysis. You do your best to eat gracefully, to avoid dribbling gravy on your dress, and, above all, to avoid locking eyes with that one cousin who will later recount, in horrifying detail, your every move. As the final course is cleared and the tea is poured, you feel a mixture of relief and bewilderment. You've survived the ordeal with most of your dignity and at least half your teeth. The guests, satisfied and slightly tipsy, begin to relax. The volume rises, the laughter grows more genuine, and the wedding breakfast slowly transitions into the real party, dancing, toasts, and a collective agreement to never speak of the aspic again. In the end, the Victorian wedding breakfast is less a meal and more a rite of passage, a culinary obstacle course that tests your patience, your palate, and your ability to nod graciously at cold beef. If you make it through, you can handle anything married life has to offer, even jellied tongue. Maybe. Every toast is a potential minefield. The best man tries for humor, the father of the bride tries not to cry, and everyone else just tries to stay awake. The toasts begin as soon as the last crumb of dense fruitcake has vanished, and the sherry glasses are topped up. This is the moment when everyone's attention is forcibly wrenched away from the ongoing skirmish over the remaining candied nuts and refocused on the lineup of trembling speakers. Victorian etiquette is clear. Toasting is not just an honor, but a delicate balancing act between sincerity, decorum, and the fine art of saying absolutely nothing offensive while still hinting at all the juicy gossip simmering just below the surface. First up is the father of the bride. He stands, glass in hand, and tries valiantly not to choke up as he reminisces about his little girl, her first lost tooth, and the time she knocked over the family samovar with a cricket bat. There's always a pause as he attempts to regain composure, which is the audience's cue to clutch their handkerchiefs and blink meaningfully at the ceiling. He then pivots, without warning, into a rambling story about his own wedding day, with a few pointed lessons thrown in. May you never let the sun set on an argument, and may you always remember who controls the household accounts. Next is the best man, whose job is to inject some levity, preferably without causing a scandal or being disinherited. He opens with a rehearsed joke about the groom's inability to dance, segueing into a series of anecdotes that teeter on the edge of mortifying. That time the groom got stuck in a privet hedge, his unfortunate encounter with a rogue swan, the mysterious case of the disappearing cufflinks. The goal is gentle embarrassment, not outright humiliation. Still, the audience leans in, eager for a slip-up. while the groom silently prays that no one mentions the summer he tried to grow mutton chops to impress a girl. Other guests are called upon to speak, each offering their own version of well wishes laced with veiled warnings. The maiden aunt stands to deliver a toast about the sanctity of the marriage bed, which leaves everyone nervously laughing into their teacups and the newlyweds wishing they could sink through the floor. The mother of the groom rises, with a speech that somehow manages to sound both supportive and slightly threatening. May you always make him his favourite pudding, and may he always be worthy of it. Not to be outdone. The family friend, who was only invited because he once lent your father a wheelbarrow, launches into a philosophical treatise on love, life, and the importance of always having a dry pair of socks. His toast lasts approximately 3 times longer than anyone else's, during which time several guests discreetly check their watches, and at least one child falls asleep in the pudding. Each toast is met with polite applause and the collective hope that no one will try to sing. Occasionally, someone does. The old-school chum at the end of the table belts out a verse of "For he's a jolly good fellow," only for the rest of the guests to join in half-heartedly, trailing off when no one can remember the second verse. The vicar intervenes with a closing benediction that doubles as a reminder to keep one's wits and hands to oneself. Beneath the civility, there's a layer of thinly veiled threat, advice delivered with a smile, and the implicit warning, do right by each other, or there will be consequences, and also gossip. The subtext is clear. The success of your marriage will be judged not just by your love, but by your ability to endure family dinners, maintain a spotless linen closet, and never, under any circumstances, serve undercooked potatoes. At last, the toasts end, the applause dies down, and the guests breathe a sigh of relief. The newlyweds, still standing, exchange a look that says, if we can survive that, we can survive anything. And somewhere at the back, someone is already planning their own speech, just in case. Because in Victorian England, the toasts are never really over. They're just waiting for the next celebration, the next wedding, the next opportunity to deliver a well-timed, thinly veiled threat, always with the utmost politeness. The wedding cake arrives, a towering frosted monument to Victorian excess, constructed primarily from flour, sugar, and pure marital anxiety. This is not a humble dessert. This is an architectural statement, an edible skyscraper intended to stun the guests, impress the neighbours, and provide endless fodder for family gossip. The Victorian wedding cake towers above the table, tier after tier supported by pillars, floral garlands, and an alarming number of toothpicks. It's less a food and more a challenge issued to the laws of physics. The top tier alone could double as emergency shelter in case of inclement weather. As the cake is wheeled in with great ceremony, every eye in the room swivels to follow its progress. Even the most stoic relatives let slip a gasp, while small children look up at the confection with reverent awe and open calculation. How much of that icing can be acquired before the adults intervene? The mother of the bride stands tall, barely concealing the terror that the whole thing might tip over and crush her best lace tablecloth. The groom's father, meanwhile, is already doing the mental math. How many pieces must be saved for future blackmail? I mean, cherished family tradition. The design itself is a wonder of Victorian ambition. Icing is piped in intricate patterns, flowers, bows, the occasional cherub, and sometimes the initials of the bride and groom spelled out in silver drage that look lovely and taste like furniture polish. Artificial birds, marzipan bouquets, and spun sugar decorations perch precariously on the edges. There is a strong sense that if you so much as breathe on it, the whole edifice will collapse in a sticky avalanche. Cutting the cake is a ritual almost as fraught as the vows. The newlyweds approach, handed a knife that looks more suited to dueling than dessert. With every guest craning their neck for a better view, the bride and groom make a joint effort to saw through the outer layer, tenacious icing, 2 inches of marzipan, and enough dense fruitcake to withstand a mild siege. The first slice is achieved with a round of applause and a collective sigh of relief from the caterer. If the cake holds together, it's a good omen. If it crumbles, well, someone will be blamed, and it's probably the baker's assistant who forgot to pray over the raisins. Victorian cakes are rarely actually enjoyed by all. The interior, usually fruit cake or a sturdy pound cake, is rich, dense, and better suited to time capsules than tea trays. The icing can chip a tooth at 20 paces. As pieces are handed out to the crowd, you witness the polite ritual of guests nibbling the edge, tucking the rest discreetly into a handkerchief for later, and congratulating the bride on her tasteful choice of citrus. There's an unspoken contest to see who can avoid eating their slice while still appearing appreciative. Children, undeterred, scrape off as much icing as possible and run wild on a sugar rush that will fuel the dance floor and, later, the inevitable collective collapse. The top tier has its own destiny, wrapped and preserved for the christening of the couple's first child, or, if fortune frowns, as ammunition for future family feuds. It will be brought out years later, dry, indestructible, and slightly mysterious, because nothing says legacy like a cake that survives longer than some marriages. In the end, the wedding cake is more than just a dessert. It's a symbol of Victorian priorities: grandeur, endurance, and the belief that bigger is always better, even if it means dental emergencies. As crumbs are swept up and guests drift toward the dance floor, the cake stands in memory, a sweet, ridiculous, slightly terrifying monument to a day already bursting with drama. So if you find yourself at a Victorian wedding, take a moment to admire the cake's improbable height and marvel at the collective determination required to eat even a single slice. You might not remember the taste, but you'll never forget the spectacle. As the couple departs in a carriage, everyone waves, cheers, and secretly wonders how long the marriage will last. Bonus points if someone's hat flies off in the commotion. After the final crumb of cake is swept away and the last round of toasts has faded into cheerful gossip, the great Victorian send-off commences, a spectacle all its own. The carriage waits outside, draped in ribbons and bedecked with flowers, horses impatiently pawing at the ground as if they too have somewhere better to be. The guests spill onto the steps in a blur of bonnets, feathers, and slightly wilted cravats, jockeying for a good view of the grand exit. No one is immune from the excitement. Mothers dab their eyes with handkerchiefs, whether from joy or relief at surviving the day's chaos. Fathers check their pocket watches and count the minutes until peace returns to the household. Siblings and cousins race to pelt the departing couple with a final volley of flower petals or the last bits of confetti. The best man, ever the opportunist, tries to attach a just married sign or, for the daring, a string of tin cans to the carriage, a newfangled idea that will scandalize Aunt Gertrude for years. The newlyweds emerge to a chorus of cheers and good-natured teasing. The bride, radiant but exhausted, lifts her skirts with practiced grace, navigating both well-wishers and the maze of trailing ribbons. The groom beams as he helps her up into the carriage, doing his best to look dashing and not at all worried about stepping on a hem or dislodging a stray bouquet. Behind them, their wedding party forms a protective phalanx, fending off overzealous relatives determined to offer last-minute advice or slip an extra sandwich into the bride's reticule. As the carriage door closes with a ceremonial thud, a frenzy of farewells erupts. Children waving handkerchiefs with abandon, while the oldest relative yells, "Mind the pothole on Market Street," a warning rooted in the family's collective trauma from Cousin Alfred's infamous wedding carriage mishap. The horses, sensing the impending freedom, toss their heads and roll their eyes at the festivities, clearly unimpressed by Victorian romance. Inevitably, someone's hat goes flying. A well-timed gust of wind or a particularly enthusiastic wave sends it sailing, causing a minor stampede and providing the sort of comic relief that guarantees this send-off will be remembered for generations. The children shriek with delight, the adults try to pretend they are above such frivolity, and the local sketch artist, always lurking nearby, starts scribbling furiously. Hats aside, the true highlight of the departure is the spectacle itself. A swirling, noisy, joyful mess, perfectly suited to cap off the day's drama. Inside the carriage, the couple finally has a moment of privacy, or as much as possible when trailed by the combined stares of two families and half the village. The interior smells faintly of lavender and nervous excitement. The bride adjusts her veil, the groom straightens his cravat, and both try to process that the gauntlet is over. Outside, guests begin the trek home, already debating every detail of the wedding, the vows, the cake, the unfortunate incident with the aspic, and of course the bride's smile as she rode away. The carriage rattles down the lane, ribbons fluttering and cans, if attached, clattering with glee. Along the way, townsfolk peer from windows, offering waves, tips of the hat, and the occasional knowing wink. The couple, at last, is left to enjoy the first quiet moments of married life, listening to the sound of hooves on cobblestones and the distant echoes of their own laughter. But even as the dust settles, the send-off's chaos lingers in family lore. For years, they'll retell the story of the dramatic exit, the hat that became airborne, and the unstoppable optimism of a carriage setting out into the unknown. Because in the Victorian age, the send-off is never just about leaving. It's about making sure everyone remembers how you left. Ideally, with flair, a little chaos, and all the hats firmly in place. And so, the grand Victorian wedding day draws to a close, with horse-drawn drama, flying confetti, and the reassuring knowledge that, however wild the exit, it's only the beginning of an even more unpredictable journey together. At last, it's time for the new couple's first night together. Expectations are high, nerves are higher, and the reality is, well, mostly confusion, candle wax, and the sound of your in-laws giggling in the next room. The grand send-off is over, the carriage has rattled away from the crowd, and you find yourself at last in the privacy of your bridal suite, except privacy is a relative term in a Victorian house, where walls are thin, floors creak, and every third cousin seems to be lurking in a nearby corridor just in case you need anything. There's no gentle fade to black, just the abrupt clatter of trunks being carried up the stairs, and the unmistakable sensation that your every move is being chronicled for future dinner table amusement. For the couple, the mood is a curious blend of exhaustion and anticipation. You're both slightly shell-shocked from the day's marathon of ritual, emotion, and elaborate carbohydrate consumption. The bride, still weighed down by lace and at least 6 layers of undergarments, has to be carefully unpinned by her new spouse, an activity that calls for more problem-solving skills than most Victorian husbands have ever exercised. Meanwhile, the groom is busy worrying about how to light the candles without accidentally burning down the inn's prized wallpaper or setting fire to his own highly flammable nightshirt. Conversation, never easy at the best of times, now takes on a special quality of awkwardness. Do you comment on the beauty of the moonlight, the elegance of the flower arrangements, or simply make nervous jokes about the noise of distant relatives carousing in the drawing room below? The air is thick with the scent of rosewater and slightly scorched hair, and the only thing more noticeable than the flickering candlelight is the chorus of suppressed giggles echoing from the hallway. Somewhere, a tipsy uncle is arguing about the best way to ensure a happy marriage, while the bride's younger siblings are daring each other to peek through the keyhole. Despite what the romantic novels suggest, the wedding night is less about fiery passion and more about logistical improvisation. Unfamiliar with the room, you stumble over trunks and trip on discarded slippers, while attempting not to reveal too much of your true, less-than-regal self. The bed itself looms as a monument to marital mystery, vast, creaky, and strewn with enough embroidered pillows to start your own haberdashery. At least one will hit the floor before midnight, another will be repurposed as an emergency curtain, and the rest will serve as barricades in case of uninvited guests or runaway nerves. There are practical considerations. How does one go about removing a corset with any degree of dignity? What if the buttons refuse to cooperate, or the laces become hopelessly tangled? For the bride, there's the added terror of having spent months hearing conflicting advice about how to please your husband and never let a man see you without your nightcap. For the groom, It's the fear that any romantic gesture will be misinterpreted as either overzealousness or utter cluelessness. Both of you are quietly hoping that, at the very least, you won't accidentally break the family's heirloom washstand before dawn. Eventually, after much blushing, fumbling, and strategic repositioning of candlesticks, the newlyweds settle into bed, facing the ceiling and the unknown with equal parts excitement and dread. Conversation resumes in fits and starts. Did you see the look on Aunt Mildred's face during the toasts? Did you notice the flower girl tripped over her own bouquet? Until laughter finally bubbles up, breaking the tension and offering a moment of genuine connection amid the chaos. If romance arrives at all, it's on its own terms, shy, sweet, and tinged with the relief of having survived the gauntlet of Victorian tradition. Tomorrow will bring more ceremony, more relatives, and more expectations. But for now, the night belongs to the newlyweds, awkwardness and all. Outside, the house creaks and sighs. Downstairs, the last of the wedding guests have finally stopped singing. And in a room strewn with lace, laughter, and half-melted candles, two people begin the slow, stumbling journey from ceremony to companionship, one confused, candlelit step at a time. You thought the wedding was about the bride and groom? Think again. In Victorian England, the mother-in-law is the real main character. She's there to inspect every button, question every menu choice, and remind you that in her day, things were done properly. You'll spend the whole event dodging her commentary and pretending you didn't overhear her telling Aunt Beatrice that your flower arrangements lack discipline. Long before you've made it down the aisle, you'll have felt her presence, an unyielding force of nature in a silk bonnet with a stare that could chill butter. She's the first to arrive at every wedding event and the last to leave, having personally supervised the hanging of every garland and the positioning of every fork. If there's a slight tilt to the cake, she'll spot it from 50 paces. If the bride's veil is even a millimetre off centre, she'll have opinions and solutions. On the morning of the wedding, her scrutiny begins with a brisk inspection of the breakfast table. Is the toast sufficiently crisp? Is the tea the proper strength? Woe to anyone who dares serve the wrong sort of marmalade. She sits at the head of the table, dispensing advice like a general marshalling her troops. Eat up, dear. You'll need your strength, though don't eat so much you bloat in your dress. I once saw a girl split a seam before the vows. Tragic. Once the dressing room chaos is underway, she becomes a whirlwind of corrections and helpful suggestions. A bit more rouge on the cheeks, dear. You're looking pale. Perhaps another safety pin on that hem. It would be such a shame if it came undone in front of the vicar. She hovers, arms folded, always ready with an anecdote about how her own wedding was a triumph of organisation, taste, and natural beauty. Of course, we didn't need so many flowers. A single sprig of myrtle and a prayer, much more elegant. At the church, she's in her element, navigating the pews like a field marshal, personally overseeing the seating arrangements. Not there, Percy, you'll block Lady Fothergill's view, and offering running commentary on the arrival of each guest. Oh look, Mrs. Drabble brought her niece again. That girl will never find a husband if she keeps wearing those hats. You try to focus on the ceremony, but you can feel her gaze boring into the back of your head, silently assessing your posture, your poise, and your prospects for producing healthy grandchildren. No detail escapes her. The vows are listened to with the intensity of a cross-examination. The music is critiqued for tempo and taste. If there's even a hint of unsanctioned emotion, tears, laughter, a sneeze during the Lord's Prayer, she will purse her lips and jot down mental notes for future retellings. During the cake cutting, she positions herself in prime view, ready to intervene if the slice is too thick, too thin, or, heaven forbid, topples from the plate. But her true moment comes at the wedding breakfast. With a fork in one hand and a napkin in the other, she quietly surveys every course, every toast, every guest. She compliments the cook, faintly, conditionally, and congratulates the couple, only to follow with a story of how, at her own wedding, the salmon was caught fresh that morning, not delivered by train. She leads the applause after every speech. yet her approval is always a shade less enthusiastic than hoped. To her, perfection is the default, and anything less is an opportunity for lifelong feedback. Throughout it all, you dodge her critiques like an Olympic sport. You smile and nod, murmuring, "Thank you" and "How interesting," while quietly fantasizing about elopement or sudden selective hearing loss. The other guests share knowing glances. Many have survived her scrutiny before. Some even recall, with perverse fondness, the moment she declared the church bells a touch shrill, but tolerable. Yet, for all her sharpness, there's an odd reassurance in her presence. If disaster strikes, a toppled cake, a runaway flower girl, a wardrobe malfunction, she's the first to act, steady and unflappable. Underneath the layers of critique lies a backbone of iron and a fierce pride in family tradition. She may grumble about the flowers, the menu, and your posture, but when she squeezes your hand at the end of the night and whispers, "Not bad, dear, not bad at all," you know you've passed the ultimate Victorian test. Welcome to married life, where the real main character is often sitting at the end of the table, watching and, occasionally, approving. Having your portrait made in 1853 is less about capturing joy and more about holding still long enough for your soul to contemplate leaving your body. Expect to stand rigidly for 20 minutes, breathing as shallowly as possible, while a man with unfortunate facial hair yells, "Don't blink!" and small children are physically restrained to prevent spontaneous chaos. By the time the flash goes off, everyone looks like they've seen a ghost, and maybe they have. Victorian life expectancy, after all. In the Victorian era, a wedding photograph is not the cheerful, spontaneous affair we know today. There are no candid shots of cake in mid-air, no blurry selfies, no videos of the best man's regrettable dance moves. Instead, the process is an ordeal of endurance, patience, and hope that your face won't freeze in a permanent expression of existential dread. The photographer arrives with enough equipment to outfit a minor expedition. Enormous tripod, heavy wooden camera, mysterious chemical bottles, a sheet for the unlucky, and a personality somewhere between a drill sergeant and an amateur magician. He insists on natural light, which means everyone is herded toward the sunniest, dustiest corner of the house or church. There, you are arranged in strict formation according to height, family rank, and how well you hide panic behind polite smiles. The bride and groom are placed at the center, standing so close, their elaborate outfits become a tangle of lace, tulle, and anxious sweat. "Look happy," the photographer commands, which is easy for him to say. He's not the one swaddled in 20 pounds of fabric with a veil threatening to obscure every facial feature. "Now, hold perfectly still," he adds, just as someone's corset creaks ominously. The older relatives are assigned sturdy chairs, propped up like statuary, while the children are threatened with dire consequences should they move, sneeze, or blink at the wrong moment. A bridesmaid is detailed to pinch the ring bearer at 5-minute intervals just to keep him alert. It's a high-stakes game of Victorian freeze tag. Everyone's eyes water. The flower girl's bouquet sheds a trail of petals. Someone coughs, is silenced with a glare, and the silence resumes, only to be broken by the photographer, who reappears from beneath his black cloth to shout, "Just 5 more minutes!" He fiddles with mysterious dials and disappears again, leaving the room bathed in the tension of a firing squad. Then comes the great moment, the flash. In 1853, this is accomplished with a terrifying burst of light and a smell like a chemical factory on fire. The children jump. The adults flinch. The bride squeezes the groom's hand so hard he nearly drops the bouquet. The photographer, meanwhile, is delighted. Perfect. Everyone looks very solemn. He never comments on smiles. Victorian portraits are a study in restraint, the implication being that life is already hard enough without the added burden of forced grinning. After the official portrait comes the series of natural poses. The couple is encouraged to gaze into the distance, with all the warmth of two people contemplating an oncoming train. while the mothers are invited to place a tender hand on the bride's shoulder. The fathers are repositioned repeatedly until their faces suggest pride and not indigestion. If the family dog has been included, chaos is inevitable. At least one photograph will feature a blurry canine streak, immortalized for future generations as the ghost at the wedding. When the ordeal is finally over, everyone relaxes just a fraction until the photographer announces, "Just one more for safety." Spirits sink, but obedience is non-negotiable. By the time the camera is packed away, everyone has aged at least a year, and the flower girl has made a nest under the grand piano. Weeks later, the final result arrives. A sepia-toned tableau of unsmiling faces, stiff postures, and the unmistakable air of a group who've survived a minor catastrophe together. And yet, this is the image that will be passed down for generations. A reminder not of the day's chaos, but of the endurance required to create a single, perfect Victorian wedding memory. So, if you're tempted to complain about modern wedding photos, just remember, at least you're allowed to blink. So, as you drift off tonight, tucked up in your warm bed with no one demanding your dowry, take a moment to appreciate the relative peace and quiet of modern life. The Victorians might have given us grand weddings, lace-covered etiquette, and some of the most intense mother-in-law energy in recorded history, but they also left us with a pretty good idea of what not to do. Namely, let your extended family decide your wedding guest list. After surviving a full Victorian wedding day, dodging superstitions, swallowing cold beef, fending off unsolicited life advice, and pretending to love silver candlesticks, you've more than earned a restful night. Remember, it took a lot of stubbornness, a little bit of luck, and an enormous tolerance for public embarrassment to get through a 19th century wedding. No air conditioning, no cake tastings, no escape from the endless parade of relatives determined to share their opinion on your posture. Tonight, as you close your eyes and leave behind all the drama, chaos, and faint aroma of boiled cabbage, maybe whisper a quiet thank you to those who came before you, people who survived corsets, public vows, and cake tall enough to conceal a medium-sized dog, because if history teaches us anything, it's that humans are wildly inventive, persistently hopeful, and just a little bit ridiculous. So breathe deep, let the fan hum, and fall gently asleep, knowing that in the morning you can celebrate love any way you want, with or without an entire trousseau, a judging grandmother, or a taxidermy hedgehog umbrella stand. Good night, and may your dreams be utterly free of tool.